You got our global banks, institutional investors, and asset managers are holding roughly $422 trillion in assets under management. And yet, private investment flows into emerging and developing economies dwarf those going to developed markets. But how can we attract more private sector investment in developing countries? And that was the focus of this chat between Mark Diop, the IFC chief executive, and Sonny Hartford, the president of UBS Asset Management, at the ongoing World Bank IMF annual meetings in Morocco. Let's listen.
Investors are willing to take some level of risk, but the uncertainty around political stability, for example, policy stability, is one of the driving issues. So one of the key ways we see to drive capital into emerging markets is to pick long-term trends that you know are going to be there. And there's a level of certainty when you look at something, for example, sustainability. And I'll give you a fun example of that. Most of you might not know this. Cocoa is very, very difficult, and it's not grown very sustainably around the globe. And there's a tremendous demand for sustainable chocolate. Cocoa is only grown, I just learned this, within 10 degrees, give or take, around the equator. So you're generally talking about emerging markets when you're going to develop in cocoa. And you know people want cadmium-free cocoa. So there's a trend there. If you want to be sustainable, if you want to believe in the world growth and the demand for chocolate, then you can find where you might invest in cocoa plantations. So there's a driving trend that would get you interested there. What you need in order to do that is a government willing to let you come in and develop that property, that land, that factory. It provides the drives and whatnot, but you need them to give you certainty that you're going to get the permits that you want as you develop, that the permits aren't going to disappear 3 years into an 8 or 9 year development project. So some of those things, you pick the long-term trend like that. The other thing that's really exciting out there and is starting to grow is blended finance. Those of you not familiar with blended finance, it's taking the idea of a tranched investment and you're separating out the different risk categories. Generally speaking, it's supported by philanthropic capital, concessionary capital, and then regular investable way capital. And by taking government support and putting it as either generally the philanthropic, their social programs that they're going to develop, then you bring in private capital that's also concessionary. They don't expect a high return, if any return, in their investment. And when they take first loss positions in projects that are on the ground in emerging markets, then investors can come in with a great deal of certainty in terms of some marginal or market-related return, call it 5, 6, 7%, that makes it acceptable to invest. So a couple of really neat ideas coming out of the markets right now.
Exactly the point, Shinel, is really, as you say, this is the realities that people are facing on the market. Let me give you an example of what we can do. Today, there are a lot of innovation going in that area, but we need to scale it up to accelerate it. For instance, you have assets which are held by our colleague from the IBRD, for instance, investing assets linked to transmission lines, which are amortized over a long period of time. So there is an appetite from the private sector to have that asset offloaded and taken by the private sector. But it requires a certain number of elements in terms of certainty, because the risk that we are bearing, that we can handle as an IFI, as an international development finance institution, the private sector needs more certainty because they don't have the sovereign part of what we are doing. So we need to bring them, and she described the first loss guarantee, all these type of instruments. We have also, and let me also be candid on that, we need also from the government side to have some visibility. If we want to have scale, we need to have not one asset here and project here. We need to have a large number of projects to be assessed, to be financed, and have a portfolio approach. So we have, for instance, recently been signing with an agreement with the government of Egypt, whereby they're telling us there is a large number of assets that the government owns and that we would like to have the private sector coming. What we need to address from the countryside is that a contract renegotiation is very common in OECD country and in common. But in emerging country is often conflictual and often source of tension, which raise the risk perception from the private sector. If an investor, if she wants to invest in a country, but she hears that the neighboring country, when contracts were renegotiated, they were not renegotiated following the rule of the law, and there were expropriation of things like that, she will not come and invest her money in it. So we need to address those issues and separate them for the political processes. You can have election, you can have change of regime. That's totally normal in a country. But there are some things which needs to be intangible for people to have a long-term horizon and make those decisions of investment that will moving large money. Lastly, is that we have often small markets, and I want to emphasize it. If we have a regulatory framework which are very different from one country to another, an investor who wants to mobilize a lot of resources cannot repeat all the time the negotiation, the legal process. And that's why, if you see the time it takes for developers and investors to put their money in an emerging market, a part of it is a lot of negotiation on the regulatory front. So standardizing all these help a lot. And I will just want to give you a very good example of what I'm talking about. When we're talking about renewable energy in Africa, we're facing that problem. So the team here worked very much towards standardizing the contract. So you have a standard contract that anybody wants to invest in a renewable energy in Africa, in the solar, knows which the documentation, and the lawyers don't have to spend hours and mouth negotiating, and it accelerates, it boosts transparency, and people were able to use auction and lower dramatically the price of electricity. This is the kind of things that we need to multiply in various sectors to be able, to my view, to attract more investment, and that's what we are trying to do right now.
One of the greatest opportunities that exists, because it is the long-term trend on so many multiple fronts. And first of all, the whole world has to get involved with it to solve the issues that we have. So by definition, you're going to be playing in the emerging markets if you want to make a difference and if you're going to drive these things. I think the upside potential in emerging markets, the new frontier on new tech, green tech, really exciting every time there's a whole new market such as sustainability. It can develop anywhere. Nobody has the ownership of that. And what Mokhtar was saying, again, if you get that, that stability or transparency around documentation, that's a big one. The other is data. China's a terrific example. Another long-term trend, we think about sustainability, is healthcare and the demographics around it, life sciences, the development and R&D around new drugs and whatnot. But you need data that has to be publicly available and has to be consistent. That's another one that's going to drive a global trend for these investments. So many emerging countries don't have the requirements needed for investors to have the data that they want. So that's something that the governments can do and companies can do if they want folks to invest. They're going to have to start providing more data.
Certainly.
If you allow me, just
yes, of course.
It's a very good point that Sunny made about the data. And we are about to